welcome to my channel. This is Nyx and this is L'Arbre Secret, where stories and spells collide. So the older I get, the cozier I become and the more I crave rest and hibernation. When I was younger, no matter the weather, I was always full of energy and I had this constant thirst to conquer the world. Now I just want to retire from it all. The world moves too fast and it's just too aggressive. There are too many emotions, too many demands, every second, every day, and it's just so exhausting. Add a few depressive episodes to the mix and you're all set for an entire season of hibernation. So here are my book recommendations to help you get through this difficult time. But don't get me wrong, I love winter. Might even be my favorite season. Stepping into the dark, seeing fairy lights adorning every street, watching fewer people around, diving into introspection like a bear entering its cave. These are some of the best things in life to me. Drinking hundreds of cups of tea, lighting 1,000 candles, cuddling with your favorite pet, plush or human being under the blankets. These are all essential to my well-being. So here's my list of books, essays, novels, poetry, comics to help you rest, dream and hibernate. I'll start with the essays. I think they really helped me slow down and appreciate the icy beauty of winter. We will start with this one by Tricia Hersey. To me, this book is just like a prayer. I love the tone that the author uses to dismantle our conditioning around work, productivity, and our role as mere subjects in this capitalistic world. It's about giving space to rest, dreaming, sleeping, and not just because it's nice and it feels good, but because our dreams and our sleep open up new portals to new dimensions that may help us envision a better world, right? If you are too stuck in the cycle of grind culture, it's hard to see how miserable we can be. This book is intersectional, as it also addresses what it means to be a Black woman coming from a cycle of being exhausted and how to reclaim your life and your dreams. She posits that our bodies are sanctuaries, places of divinity and profound healing. And she says, we believe we are only meant to survive, not thrive. She claims that our dream space has been robbed from us. I completely agree with her. We need to reclaim our dream space. And she also refers to one of my favorite poetess of all times, Audre Lorde, who in her essay, Poetry is Not a Luxury, says, poetry is not only dream and vision, it is the skeleton architecture of our lives. It lays the foundation for a future of change, a bridge across our fears of what has never been before. So, rest is resistance. The second book that also helped me love winter and appreciate its beauty and just slow down is Wintering by Katherine May. It's so beautiful. As you can see on the cover, even Elizabeth Gilbert praises it. And she says, truly a beautiful book. Well, I think she's right. So in Wintering, we have here another manifesto for winter and for relaxing. I think Katherine May was the first person who made me see that we all had inner seasons and that we need to own these internal cycles. We need to postpone productivity, especially in the midst of winter. And she says, you need to live a life you can cope with, not the one that others expect from you. Just start saying no. Just do one thing a day. No more than 2 social events a week. And I stand by this. She also adds, if happiness is a skill, then sadness is too. Perhaps through all those years at school, or perhaps through other terrors, we are taught to ignore sadness, to shove it down into our satchels and pretend it isn't there. As adults, We often have to learn to hear the clarity of its call. That is wintering. It is the active acceptance of sadness. It is the practice of allowing ourselves to feel it as a need. It is the courage to stare down the worst parts of our experience and commit to healing them the best we can. Wintering is a moment of intuition, where our true needs are felt keenly, like a knife. And it's also a praise for sleep. And I think it's such a good message, because when we are stuck in the grind culture, we tend to completely neglect the quality of our sleep, the duration of our sleep. We don't have enough sleep. And she says that sleep is not a dead space, but a doorway to a different kind of consciousness, one that is reflective and restorative. And this is another common point with Tricia Hersey in Rest is Resistance. The next book is not a book that I thought I could incorporate in my lists, but talking about rest activism, talking about wintering, made me think, wait a second, the first book that really helped me with understanding the cycles of my body, just respecting them, going slow, is the one called Wild Power by Alexandra Pope and Shani Hugo Wurlitzer. So it says, discover the magic of your menstrual cycle and awaken the feminine path to power. Even if you don't have a uterus, this book is super interesting about our inner seasons, because I do believe that everybody has seasons. Even, people that are not subjected to the inner cycle that a lot of people go through, a lot of women do. And this is a book that taught me a lot from a physical but also from a spiritual point of view. These two women, they really brought me peace with my body, with my internal cycles, and with my blood moons. And when I read this book, then I started writing a blood moon diary, and it helped me track my mood, track my dreams at that specific time of the month. And something kind of magical happened, is that becoming aware, becoming conscious of my internal season helped me alleviate the pain. So I'm very lucky because I don't have much pain, but when I do, I feel like just being more aware, just centering and grounding in my emotions, in my body, in my dream space, etc., really helps me. What I love about this book is that the authors divide the month into 4 specific seasons. So we have menstruation, which is your inner winter, where you let go of the self that you think you should be, and you return to your authentic self. Inner winter is also a great moment to press pause and just say no to the world. Then we have inner spring, which is the pre-ovulatory phase, where you cherish that authentic self. Inner summer, of course, is ovulation. You step forward and you declare yourself to the world. And finally, autumn is where you withdraw and you reflect on your journey. And then we have this beautiful, beautiful book, A Spell in the Wild by Alice Tarbuck. This book is another celebration of our internal, but also, of course, external seasons. So Alice Tarbuck, and not Alice Starbuck, Alice Tarbuck, dedicates a chapter to each month, mixing pop culture with literature, pagan history. I have to say that she's a very erudite writer, and I really appreciate it. And she puts her personal insights into the mix, and honestly, I think it's such a good book. She has a keen eye for nature's changes. And what I love about this book is that she proposes a ritual for each month of the year. It's a very wholesome book, and reading it feels like a conversation with a fellow witch. And now I'm just rereading the chapter, dedicated to January. And I like to do that if I have the opportunity, and if I think about it, I like to reread the chapter dedicated to the month at the beginning of each month to sync with the energies of the season. For example, her chapter dedicated to January is called January Smelling the Weather. I love it. And I totally relate to this beautiful practice. And she clearly encourages us to become synesthetic witches, saying, people who can smell the weather, understand the weather, and thus the world, just as they might understand the body of a lover. It is an intimate form of knowing, built up over a long time. Love it. And you're gonna see that it's so mouth-watering because the rituals and spell that she's giving for each month are just so interesting. So for example, for September, you can make a herbal soda for fever and heat. October, blessing a new altar. November, a healing ritual for winter aches and pains. And there's also like a title, for each month. And November is sex magic. Of course, Scorpio season. December is midwinter and magic in the dark, and the ritual is a spell for hope in darkness. And January, it was a spell for the full moon. February, it was fairies, a spell for weather. I mean, it's so poetic, right? I just love it. Highly recommend this one. So the next one is a book that I've been recommended on BookTube by Katherine. I think she's an amazing booktuber, artist, and pretty soon writer, as I guessed. And she talked a lot about this book, Upstream, by Mary Oliver. And I'm so glad that I followed Katherine's advice, because this book blends everything I love. Essays, philosophy, nature, poetry, spirituality. Mary Oliver writes so beautifully. Some chapters are poetic gems. To me, I think she's part of the enchantivist movement, I think. I'm pretty sure. She's clearly a neo-romantic. She tackles different themes here, like the desire to be lost, how poetry is a temple, yes, and the need for solitude when you're a creator. She says, my loyalty is to the inner vision, whenever and however it may arrive. If I have a meeting with you at 3, rejoice if I am late. Rejoice even more if I do not arrive at all. There is no other way work of artistic worth can be done. Thank you for saying that. Despite me waking up so freaking early just to make sure I'm gonna be on time, there's something with time that I don't know what's happening. I always end up like in a sort of vortex, like I'm reading something or I'm daydreaming, I'm painting a work of art on my face and then I'm late. I mean, I'm always late for silly reasons, but I'm always late actually for good reasons, just as she says. And if we want our life to be artistic, please don't let the clocks rule your world. She also emphasizes the beauty of the winter hours. She talks about the sprawling darkness of not knowing. This book is like a little Bible to me. I love her poetry, but I must say that her essays contain both a poetic soul and their intellectual and spiritual epiphanies. She also wrote this book when she was pretty old, and you can definitely feel the crone energy in this book, and I think it's the perfect energy, the perfect archetype to tune into during winter time. The next one is a tiny little book that I encountered at Shakespeare & Co. You must know this super famous English bookshop in the heart of Paris, which is so quaint and so beautiful. When I was giving creative writing workshops at my school in Paris, I thought that was an excellent start to understand how poetry works and why it's so universal. It's very simple. It's beautiful book that is easy on the eye, and it really deconstructs the myth that poetry is steeped in classicism. It helps us see the universality of poetry in the specificity. It makes us want to take our pen and just write our heart away. And I know that when we read a few passages with my students, I think it kind of helped with our creative blocks and with our fear that we wouldn't be good enough. It really helps us appreciate poetry on a physical and on a sensual level. I'm going to read you the first paragraph of page 62. Carrie Rudzinski has this line in one of her poems: "Let's get married and name all of our children Ribcage." Can you explain what this line means? Maybe not. But there's a good chance you love it regardless. Do your hairs stand on end? Is there a slight buzzing surrounding the perimeter of your existence? Maybe. A poem is not necessarily meant to be experienced in a straightforward story. It's more like a complex soup. Each flavor, each spice, each ingredient achieving a different thing. A poem is something to be engaged with. Taste the poem on your tongue. It's beautiful, right? You see why the students loved it, and you see why it was such a good start when you're doing creative work and you're scared that you're gonna be a fraud. It's so good. Okay, so it started getting a bit dark, so I changed the lighting, but it's a very complex process. And I think the lighting in the first part was not that good, but anyway, we'll see how it goes. So the next and the last collection of essays is Bluets by Maggie Nelson. So you may know her, she's super famous. She wrote the Argonauts, I think. I haven't read it, it's the only book I've read from her, but I was seduced already. I read this little blue book when I was depressed, and I think it really helped me in my depression. At the time I was very much into the symbolism of the color blue, and wearing things a certain color really soothed me. In a strange way, I would say that her blues made me integrate my blues. It's not a thing to be ashamed of, and it becomes an artistic object. Plus, it has a color. Great. There's this quote from her that I think is very interesting. She says, "It calls me to think of blue as the color of death. I have long imagined death's approach as the swell of a wave, a towering wall of blue. You will drown, the world tells me, has always told me. You will descend into a blue underworld. Blue with hungry ghosts, Krishna blue, the blue faces of the ones you loved. They all drowned too." It's very dark, but it's also pretty reassuring to see that thinking about death so much, adorning death with such beautiful colors, beautiful aesthetic intentions, thinking about the death of your loved ones can be that soothing, that reassuring. I mean, it's reassuring in itself, right? And as you can hear, the book blurs the boundaries between poetry, essay, and memoir. It's super original because it's a fragmented essay composed of 240 statements, which work as an invitation to introspection and meditation. It's so good. I don't know what else to say. I love it. Okay, so let's move on to the novels. I don't have as many novels as I had essays because I think that wintertime is a perfect time to retrospect, introspect, and so I think essays are the best genre to do that. But I love reading novels by the fireplace and just, dream. All the novels that I picked are actually pretty different from classic novels with a sort of linear continuity or linear classic structure. There is no linearity in all the novels that I picked. The first one is Orab, which is a grass pillow in English, or The Three-Cornered World by Natsume Soseki. In Japanese, it's called Kusamakura, which means grass pillow. So as I told you, it's not a mere novel, it's a poetic experiment. It is infused in the aesthetic of haikus, and the protagonist is an artist who meditates on the world. I think it offers a beautiful meditation on art, poetry, beauty, mystery, love, nature, existence, and silence. And again, it's blending different genres. It's kind of a unique experience. I remember when I read it, I was on the train and the light was kind of crepuscular, a bit like here. The skies were tinged with gold and gray, and I was surrounded by those beautiful mountains, and they seemed to guide me, and everything felt just more alive when I read this book. It's one of those books that kind of catalyze your sense and your experience of living, and which makes you more aware of your existence. As a poet, I really related on his reflections on poetry and beauty, and he says something about poetry that is so important to me. He says, "The poet has an obligation to dissect his own corpse and reveal the symptoms of its illness to the world." Indeed, I would say that the poet or the bard has a social role that has been forgotten with time, that our modern, capitalistic, and utilitarian society has deemed superficial and whimsical. But the poet, at the core, really is an oracle. And the fact that we despise poetry, poets, bards, really says a lot about our society being ill. So in this book, and in many Japanese novels, I would say, the mist is very present. And I have this profound love for the mist. I even wrote a collection of poems about it. I'm in love with its symbolism, its sheer beauty. It's like a veil adorning things. I said adorning a lot of times here. It's okay. So it's like a veil, and it's also an invitation to lift up the veil. And even if you can't lift up the veil, like, marvel at the beauty. So he says, "The mist drifts, veiling the mountains, hiding the world, yet it reveals something deeper, an impression of formless beauty." So it's something that I've learned reading about the mists in literature, and especially in Japanese literature. So of course I'm not going to pronounce it well, I'm sorry, but the word eimai in Japanese is used to qualify what is blurry, vague, and ambiguous. So apparently its etymology is reminiscent of a clouded sun, and the blurriness and the vague are civilization forces in Japan. I think it's so interesting because in the Western world, it's more structure, symmetry, all those Greek principles of beauty, etc., that are civilization forces. Whereas in Japan, apparently, from what I've read, I've never been, but I would like to discover this country one day. From what I've read, it's more focused on how the vague and the ambiguous and the blurriness and the mists can structure your perception of beauty, of strength. It's so interesting. Soseki also adds that the poets are fed mist and that they drink dew. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We do. So, in a way, they become the very thing that they write about. And it reminds me of kids in Bright Star. I don't know if you saw this movie by Jane Campion. It's such a gorgeous, delicate, beautiful movie. And there's this scene where Fanny Brown wants a poetry class from John Keats, and she wants to learn the art, how to craft a poem. And he gives her a magnificent speech about poetry, saying, for example, that in order to write about a lake, we need to become the lake and to really feel all the sensations correlated to what it is to be in the lake. I'm going to show you an extract from the movie because I think it's so relevant.
I still don't know how to work out a poem. A poem needs understanding through the senses. The point of diving in a lake is not immediately to swim to the shore, but to be in the lake, to luxuriate in the sensation of water. You do not work the lake out. It is an experience beyond thought. Poetry soothes and emboldens the soul to accept mystery.
I love mystery.
So the next one is a little French book by Philippe Delerme. Philippe Delerme is quite famous in France. He wrote a lot about the beauty of the mundane, finding beauty in little things. For example, he wrote a book that is translated in English that's titled The Small Pleasures. But I think it's the first book that I've read about something that is so immaterial. Here, the whole book is a metaphor. It's very Bachelardian, once again, but it will definitely be influenced by Air and Dreams from Bachelard and not Water and Dreams. Focusing on sensations here as portals of contemplation is a great help during winter time when everything slows down and the world can seem very bleak. But here it is light, it is ethereal, uplifting. Reading Delerme is like huddling in a comfy cloud above the sky. It's a warm embrace and it's like a feathery touch. I love him. In English, you can read The Small Pleasures and I think it will give you a good foretaste. Then I read En cabanet, which literally means to be in a cabin, but as an adjective. So unfortunately there's no English translation yet, but her second novel has been translated and it's called Feral. So the author takes us to Kamouraska, Canada, and she lives there for a whole winter in a tiny little cabin, and she's eager to write, to rewild her life, but her solitude is kind of too heavy for her, and each day is like a physical battle to stay alive. Go find branches in the wood, prepare the fireplace, raise the temperature of the room. She develops her own definition of rural feminism here, and there's one encounter in this text that I really like. It's a good disruption into her solitude that brings sensuality and warmth, and I'm not gonna say too much. I like this quote from this text. "The pilgrimage to the only cathedral that inspires my faith, a deep forest that shelters all my confessions." There's nothing else to add, it's just perfect. So it's a very tiny book, very easy to read. I read it in just 1 hour and a half under the covers on a very, very cold day, and that was perfect. Kind of in the same vein, Winterwood, which is a novel. I think it's the most linear novel that I have here in this selection, but I kind of enjoyed it, I must say. I think I'm a romantic at heart, and this one kind of struck a chord. I really loved her first book, which was The Wicked Deep, and I enjoyed it so much. I think the goth teenager felt heard and felt seen when I read her book, and this one kind of feels the same. So here, it's the perfect witchy, cozy book to read during winter. The chapters are punctuated by witchy recipes. And there's beautiful black pages. It's so wholesome, it's so relatable. I've never felt so warm in the middle of winter. Her prose is beautiful. It's simple, but some passages are almost luscious. It's a love declaration to wilderness, to freedom, with a beautiful love story, and I'm gonna say too much, even if it's a bit predictable, but still it feels good. And that's it. So our next category is poetry. And I just selected 2 books of poetry, but I think they deliver. The first one is À la lumière d'hiver by Philippe Jacotet. So, as you can guess, French poet. It's a beautiful collection of poems that must be read in January under an icy sky and an opaline sun. It should be read when it's cold and silent, when everything smells pure and about to begin again. So I've selected a few quotes that I really like. I'm sorry it has never been translated into English, but I've translated a few extracts for you.
As if light itself, aging, became humble, tender, by fading away. Silence is not empty, it is like a stone, like a tree, full of memory. Winter is like a long mirror. One no longer knows if one is inside it or before it, if what one sees is light or the shadow it leaves behind. Perhaps writing is this, holding on as much as one can to what is vanishing.
The second poetry book is another book in French, I'm so sorry. Hasn't been translated as well, but it's a book that I discovered in a great bookshop in Paris called Chan. It's in the 6th arrondissement. And if you love poetry, I think it's the best place to visit in Paris. They have an impressive selection of contemporary and past poets, and I always find a new gem. This one is called Broadening the Present. I don't think the translation is very beautiful, but in French it's very evocative, and I think wintertime is the best time to read poems about freezing time, trying to seize the day, trying to appreciate the icy beauty of everything frozen. And so people don't buy poetry anymore, and I think it's a shame, because poetry offers us a reflective mirror that blends beauty with meditation. Why don't we spend time reading poetry anymore, not doing anything else, but just letting the words penetrate us and infuse our whole being? So here it's basically the same themes broached by Soseki or Jacotet. Béatrice Marchal urges us to pay attention to small, seemingly insignificant details in order to access a more timeless, a more profound dimension of life. It's also an invitation to slow down by celebrating the transient side of life. And I'm going to read you a few extracts that I translated. Light brushes against things without possessing them, and it is in this brushing that they are fully revealed. It's a beautiful celebration of nature in its most animistic aspect. The leaves in the wind speak an ancient language we have forgotten, but their whispers still touch us. Some metaphors are tremendously gorgeous and just mind-blowing. The final part is comics. The 2 comics I've selected are based on depression, and I think they can bring a lot of help. The first one is My Depression by Elizabeth Swados. This little book really helped me when I was in a dark place. It's like a fast forward to healing. It's also quite a surprising book that will give you a lot of cognitive dissonance, but once you accept that depression can be dealt with strange little doodles, humor, rawness, intimacy, you can embrace the beauty of this book. It helps us connect on a deeper level with the feelings of isolation, stigma, melancholy, the struggle to find joy. It's a great tool to let go of the deep, dark stuff. And I think it could be a great tool in creative writing workshops or in therapeutic workshops as well. Because her style is very childish and it's kind of cathartic. Next It's not a comic, it's a graphic novel. It's called This Is How I Disappear by Myriam Mal. So this one is translated in English. It's about the depression of Clara, our protagonist, due to her toxic workplace and her lack of appreciation, and also due to the fact that she's constantly pressured to perform. It's pretty subtle, it's very empathetic, and it touches upon feminism, sexism in the workplace. It celebrates friendship and other systems of support, of emotional support. I love her sensitive approach, her relatable and very subtle view on depression, which can indeed sometimes feel like a slow disappearance, just like on the cover. And finally, there's this little art book called Newage. I remember I bought it in Marseille, which is a city in the south of France, at the Museum, which is this beautiful museum located between the sea and the sky. And you have this metal lattice that wraps the museum into a safe cocoon, but also allows the spectators to marvel at the natural beauty surrounding them. I remember when I went there, I was filled with the bluest of blues. And I'm not talking about the feeling, I'm talking about the color here, because it was so vibrant, like I've never seen such a vibrant blue before. And this vibrant blue is so specific to Mediterranean cities. Marseille will always be a very poetic and experimental city to me. And I wanted to take a precious reminder of this vibrancy. So Nuage was the perfect souvenir. It's a selection of contemporary artworks that explore the shapes and ideas conveyed by the clouds. And there's one that I especially loved. It was Le Promenoir à Nuages, and we call it a cloud stroller in English. And I'm a sucker for these useless surrealistic objects. I don't know, it gives me pleasure. I think it's so deeply poetic. So as a conclusion, I'd say that this selection is full-on therapeutic. It deals with melancholy, despondency, and instead of finding answers, maybe it raises more questions. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's important to really stand with those questions during wintertime. It does not look for clear-cut answers. And I think those clear-cut answers would put more pressure to a fragile heart that is already consumed by a sick society. I think the questions raised here by poetry, art, and this selection of books bring comfort. And these books made me realize that it was okay not to have everything figured out. On the contrary, winter invites us to press pause and reflect, and being comfortable, frozen, is a first step towards healing. All in all, winter is about healing. It's about embracing those dark, secluded places in ourselves and taking them to the park to watch the birds. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments which book you liked, which book you read, which book you'd like to read, and let's start a conversation about how you experience this winter, what makes you feel good, what are your comfort books, and which questions do they raise for you. Thanks a lot for your support. Thanks a lot for your comments on the last video. I really hope you liked this one, and I wish you a great winter. Bye.